You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing. Of course, this is the 602 Club, and we're so glad you're here. And with me, as she is always, mummy expert, Christy Morris.
I am a librarian.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to offend. My bad. And I am so glad to have back the one and only second contact man, Tristen Riddell.
I listen to 602 every damn week.
Aw, you're so sweet, man. And you know what? I'm so thankful that you talked me into watching Lower Decks, and like it's the best thing Trek has done since the end of Enterprise. It's so good. So anyway,
yeah, for those of you wondering what he means by Second Contact, I have a show called Second Contact, a Lower Decks commentary podcast, which everybody should check out. It's a lot of fun. Me and Charlene Schmidt will play the latest Lower Decks episode and then talk about it as it's running. We make it fun and entertaining whether you're watching it live or not. And it's I had to convince Rushing to watch it because I have my issues with New Trek, and I know you guys you do too. Yep. Rushing, but Lower Decks is just pure joy. It's just a love letter to the fans.
It's a love letter, well done. But we're not here to talk about Star Trek because we got a whole network to do that. We're here to talk about everything that's not Star Trek on the 602 Club, and this week we're going to be talking about The Mummy from 1999, not to be confused with The Abomination from Tom Cruise a few years ago. But before we get in, we want to say thank you to everybody for listening. Please check us out. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're getting your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, reviews really do help people find the show. So if you're listening there, just hit the button, give us a quick star rating and review. We'll read that review out in the show if you give it to us. Of course, you could find us online on Twitter. We'd love to have your follow. We'd love to interact with you over there at the 602 Club. We're also on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. Also, you can find us online at Trek.fm. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek.fm. Listeners only discussion group, the Babel Conference. You can join. Hey, talk to listeners from all over the world about what's going on. And you could find us at Trek.fm/contact, where you can send an email to Christy and I, and we'll get that, and we'll be able to talk to everyone about whatever you have. Maybe you've got ideas about shows, or you've got something you wanted us to talk about, or maybe we didn't cover a topic in a movie that you thought was really good. Let us know. Now, y'all, I wanted to ask you this. This movie came out in 1999, obviously a massive year for movies, you know, with The Matrix coming out that year. You had The Phantom Menace, of course, and so great big year for movies. And I'm wondering, was this a movie that you guys experienced back then, or was it something that you had to find later? Where did you guys first experience The Mummy?
I was enamored with it from 1999 onward. I was on board with this film. I was super excited for it. I loved Brendan Fraser. I thought he was I was one of the kids who really enjoyed George of the Jungle, and I'm trying to think. I really liked him in With Honors, with Joe Pesci.
Yeah,
and I'm blanking on some other ones because I'm losing my timeline. I can't remember what came after The Mummy and what came before. But I've always been a big fan of Brendan Fraser, and I feel like this when I saw the trailer for this, I was like, oh man, this is gonna be his film. Like this is gonna skyrocket him into the thoughts and minds of Americans at home. You know, like George in the Jungle was very kiddie, but it was very successful. But this one was going to be much more for the masses. And yeah, like I'm pretty sure I saw it in the theater. And as soon as it came out on VHS, I bought it. And I was like an evangelist for this film. Like anybody who would come over, I'm like, have you seen The Mummy? Like, have you seen Stephen Sommers' The Mummy? Come on, let's watch it together. I remember like I drove to Kansas City with my dad to see my half sister, and we brought it with us specifically to show it to her. And yeah, it was just, I absolutely love this film from day one.
That's cool. I like to hear a story like that where it's got so much more value to you than just, oh yeah, I remember seeing it that one time. So, yeah, I would say I'm kind of along the same lines, but not quite as much. But my dad and I remember saw this together. I think not in the theater. It was at home, but it was one that was in regular rotation after that. But definitely same as you, Tristan, with Brendan Fraser being like a staple part of my childhood. And then seeing him starring in this movie, I thought this is going to catapult him into now being like an action star, like a more serious actor than just being the comedy go-to anymore. And I was kind of familiar with Rachel Weisz already, so I was still interested in seeing her in it as well. And then, you know, there were a lot of really cute guys in that movie aside from Brendan Fraser, so I was okay with that too.
Yeah, you know, it is really interesting to me because, you know, this is a movie that obviously came out in a really pivotal year, as I mentioned, and with the pivotal nature of this film, in the sense that like it was up against a lot of things that year, and I remember watching this in the theater. It came out and enjoying it and thinking, oh, that's really fun. You know, it had so many of the hallmarks of the action adventure movies that I had grown up with. You know, I definitely grew up in the era of, you know, a lot of old Disney movies, you know, the action adventure Disney movies, you know, like Christy, you and I have talked about some of them here, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or, you know, the Swiss Family Robinson type of thing, Kidnapped, all those kind of things. So I really grew up with that type of film and that feeling in film. And this really hits that, you know, like it has that. And so I think that was something that I really actually ended up appreciating about this movie. And yeah, I mean, it is a movie that for me did get overshadowed by other movies that came out. Obviously that year specifically, like I was very much enamored with and fell in love with The Matrix that year. Like that movie, I was old enough and it completely changed what I thought of film, you know? And, you know, obviously I'm a massive Star Wars fan. And so it's the Phantom Menace. It's the beginning of the prequel era. So that really changed things for me as well. So, but all that together and all that said, that didn't mean that I didn't enjoy The Mummy and think, oh, wow, this is great. And well, I was really interested because, you know, I always love to do this to kind of go back and kind of look at everything. And I had no idea that this movie has such a cursed origin. Like, they've been trying to make this movie since 1987. And George Romero was actually trying to make this movie. And I wanted to ask you about some of the ideas that they had. One is his first idea is to make The Mummy like a Terminator film with a much more modern take. So when you hear that, does that sound interesting to either of you?
Well, I think it kind of depends because none of the movies, you know, with this movie being in development hell, with having the cursed origins, as you say, I have kind of a divorced feeling towards it because none of those movies were this movie. Sure. It was really just the studio saying, we want to make a Mummy movie. You know, let's make a remake of The Mummy. It was never like, let's make a movie with Rick O'Connell and Evie and everything like that, like set in the 30s or the 20s or something like that. And so, and we've gotten a Mummy reboot since then, and there's so many Mummy movies throughout time that when I hear about it, I'm just like, oh, maybe that could have been interesting, or maybe this could still be interesting, but you know, like all of it pales in comparison to I think what we ended up getting, because as you were talking about earlier about how this kind of harkens back to the days of old with Disney action adventure movies from when we were growing up, this is when I sit back in my rocking chair, with my mint julep saying, they don't make movies like this anymore. And George A. Romero, wanting to make like a zombie-like mummy film, well, that's very much on brand. And we've seen a Romero film before. We've seen several Romero zombie films. So it just would have been, put in Egypt, and then there you go. You have Romero's The Mummy. That's my take on it. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that you still end up kind of getting some of that vibe with the way that they play Imhotep in this movie. Not in a bad way. That it's this constant impending doom kind of feeling, but obviously not the time travel piece. But
yeah.
I think that it definitely, like you were saying, Tristan, it's what we get is a lot better than all of the different iterations you hear about in the development process. But it is crazy how many different people it goes through hands-wise of treatment of the script, that it takes 12 years to finally come out. And then there's movies that have taken longer, but I do like that they ended up going with, for one, a more scary version of a mummy, because I remember seeing, the original version of the Mummy from the 30s, and it's really not threatening at all. It's a guy in cloth wraps who moves really slow and stick the arms out. This is like, he's like a living, breathing human being because he's taken the parts from people's living bodies and stuff. I thought that was a cool way to interpret it differently.
Yeah, I mean, just the thought of, and I always think it's so interesting how film works, in the sense that, like, oh, we have something that's successful. Okay, well, what can we do then to, like, do something around that, and make it work for ourselves? And the idea of, creating a, and it's not a terrible idea to create a movie with a Terminator-like mummy, I guess. But I do think that it just doesn't feel original at that point. You're not dealing with anything that feels like it has any originality to it, which is a little bit disappointing. And, I mean, it doesn't really help then, too, that you're trying to kind of fit something into a mold that maybe feels more modern. And so, the idea of having it either, Romero even comes back later on and decides, maybe he'll try to make basically a zombie movie with mummies, and it's just like, okay, well, that's even lamer. And so I don't think really, to me, any of that works. And, it is Stephen Sommers who comes in and, says that this movie should feel like Indiana Jones or Jason and the Argonauts or those kind of things. And so I think one of the most important things as I was rewatching this movie was the decision to put it in the 20s. And to give it a certain type of tone, which the tone that they go for is, hey, we want this to basically be a romantic comedy type movie almost with action adventure. So it's like Romancing the Stone or something like that. And we're going to give it that feel. How do you, in the end, how do you feel like that works? Do you feel like that was the best choice then that they made here?
I have to say yes, because I enjoy it so much. I mean, it's that action adventure with a romantic subplot where, of course, they're going to be, they're going to fall in love because they're two good-looking people who are the male and female leads. Right. That's how movies work. Like that's just how it goes. And it's just there's not so much comedy that it's just a gaffe all the time, that it's not jokey. It's the right amount of action, the right amount of horror, the right amount of comedy, and the right amount of romance, where you don't roll your eyes at any particular item. It's a very well balanced overall adventure film that has something for everybody.
Yeah, I think that the biggest weakness it had in all the development was exactly what you were saying, Matt, where it's trying to bring zombies into the modern era in the movie. it just never worked. Every time they were trying to make it work that way, the time period was part of the problem. And then the tone. Yeah. I mean, you have to have a good mix of these other things along with the story to make it interesting. And I mean, really, all their iterations as well never mentioned having a hero that's driving it other than the mummy. So I think that adding of O'Connell and having him be the main focus and, him battling it out with the mummy was another great choice that they went with instead of it just being about the villain.
I agree with that completely. I think that's something that, Christy, you rightly call out, the fact that we make the transition to this movie being more about the hero and those characters rather than the mummy is the big thing, It's the thing that, even in the Terminator movies, the movies aren't about the Terminator, right? They're about the other human characters the Terminator is around. I mean, part 2 of the Terminator is more about the Terminator, but it's really not his story. And so I think they rightly called out, like, no, this you can't really make the mummy interesting.
There's no character growth there.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I do think maybe that's something to kind of talk about here before we kind of get into some other things, which was the fact of this character, this mummy character as the villain really is like the evil version of Romeo and Juliet. Like he wants nothing more than to bring his love back to life regardless of the costs. And so just like a really evil version of that story. And of course, both of them don't really care about, who they hurt with their quote unquote love, like they're willing to bring down an entire dynasty regardless of the cost. And so, how does that kind of work as the main impetus for the story? Because that's actually where we start the movie, is with that backstory.
I think it's beautiful that we get a backstory for the mummy, that it's not just, oh, this is a creature like Alien. This isn't just a creature like Predator, where we actually have some sort of, don't take this the wrong way, but like some sort of emotional investment in the story where we understand while we may not agree, but we understand his motivations. Like this is why he's doing what he's doing. It's demented, it's genocidal, but it's why he's doing it. It's for the sake of love and for the sake of bringing back his beloved. And like you said, it's a twisted Romeo and Juliet. And I think that was actually Arnold Vosloo's idea. Was he agreed to be the mummy? He agreed to be Imhotep when he talked to Stephen Summers, but he said, he's like, I'm going to play this completely straight. I want this to be like, I want to play this like it's my own love story, even if it's not. He says that he didn't want it to be overly jokey. He didn't want to just be a monster. Like, he wants to play it as he is the hero of his own story. And I really respected that when I read that. And I think that works. And we need that backstory to have that, to kind of raise the stakes and feel like you have two forces battling each other. And it's a battle of wills. One is survival, one is dominance. And if you just have survival, then, I mean, that can be okay. We have a lot of those movies and they're made very well. But this one gives you even more of a stake.
1000%. Yes. I think that it is also this beautiful juxtaposition of the two of them, with Imhotep and Anck-su-namun's story feeling like something you can, like you were saying, understand, but it's still wrong the way that they go about everything. But then you also feel bad for them that everyone else from the 20s that's now come into this story is trying to keep them apart, even though you know it's wrong. So I like that they have that piece of it. And I think that the choice of him as the mummy character was really great casting. I mean, they said he got the role after one audition, whereas other people like Rachel Weisz had to audition multiple times before she got a call back. So, I mean, he was right to want to play it that way and to be very serious about it and not make it a silly creature.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really makes it work is exactly what you both are saying. And I was thinking about this, the idea of creating a villain that does have something recognizable to it. Like something that we can all kind of cling to a little bit, which is the idea that you would, fall in love with somebody. And that, you might be deterred from actually loving that person, or something might stand in your way. And of course, this is the worst version of that. These two people are quite selfish in their in their love, and it's the very worst versions of that. But I think it really does kind of work here to kind of give you something to where there is a part of you that can understand what it is that's driving these characters. And I think that's a good thing. Like, you want to be able to have some sort of ability to kind of have some connection to them. Otherwise, they are just villains that you can kind of throw away in your mind, and I think that's a good thing, that we can't just easily get rid of them as characters or just disregard them completely. So I really like that. And I think something that you mentioned, Tristan, that I think is really important was the idea of just Brendan Fraser himself and just casting him in general with this movie. And, he's somebody who wasn't necessarily their first choice, because they looked at like Tom Cruise and like they asked Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, they all, and I was thinking about all of those other actors, and one of the, to me, the thing that they don't bring to this is the ability to, I think, play it. And I don't think they could play it the same. They couldn't be as fun, I don't think they have the spirit necessary. I mean, the closest you could probably get actually is Brad Pitt, because
that's exactly what I was going to say.
He's
from
the
that
closest
list.
you could get to being, I think, this fun.
Because I feel like with this particular direction, you needed a hunky man. And I'm not trying to be funny here. Like you need someone who's a rogue. Tom Cruise, beautiful man, great actor, not a rogue. Ben Affleck at that time, no, not even close. Nor Matt Damon in 1999, not even close. But Brad Pitt, this is post Legends of the Fall. The river runs through it. He's got the hunky down, but he's also got the. Brad Pitt does have the comedic chops. He doesn't bring it out a lot, but it's there. Like, you see him use it, and he uses it really well. And I think this could have been, I don't want to say just as good, but because I love Brendan Fraser in this, but I think he could have done it, and it would have been. It would have been an enjoyable film, even if it was Brad Pitt and Rachel Weisz. I think that would have been a cool pairing too.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it definitely at this time in Brad Pitt's career, he was that kind of actor. He could also have that lovable quality that Fraser has from doing things like George of the Jungle. You see that similarity in the two of them way more than you would the others. And yeah, I think that most of the time, Cruise, aside from what we know from like Top Gun and stuff like that, his roles after that were much more serious. So I think that it wouldn't have been as good of a balance of a movie having one of them to have the comedy and the romance that you wanted to have for this kind of movie, and to have a character that's like an Indiana Jones or a Han Solo to really believe in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, Tristan, you were saying something earlier in the way in which, this character has a roguishness to him, and how important that roguishness really is to what you get. And in many ways, I think, for myself, I always kind of think of that as like the Han Solo type character or the Indiana Jones type character, because Harrison Ford plays that just absolutely perfectly. Like, he's so good at playing that role. Mainly that's because that's probably just, that's who Harrison Ford seems to be in real life. And that's why he's so good at it. But Brendan Fraser, I think, pulls that off, but with a slightly more comedic bent. And that's obviously what this movie is going for, is to be lean into a little bit more of the comedy of things, but at the same time have a nice foundation. And I think Brendan Fraser just brings that to him. And he does have the right kind of like cocksure attitude that you want from this character. And at the same time, he also has a combination of the different versions of Indiana Jones we get, because like he doesn't really want to be going back to this place because he knows that like this place is no good. It's worth staying away from, but he's willing to do it because he's interested in the girl. And I really do think that this movie would be much less successful without him in it. And in all honesty, I can't really imagine anybody else pulling this off the way that he does. And so I am very glad that they ended up getting him for the role, because it's just, I mean, he's so much fun. And he's such a, like, I don't know, to me, he is just kind of a great goofball. And I love it, you know? So I did want to ask you guys, obviously, when you have your leading man, you really do need somebody who fits with him really well. You know, they looked at American actresses and ended up going with Rachel Weisz. And I think to me, I'm glad that they didn't go with an American actress, because to me, in many ways, for some reason, and I don't know if you guys agree, but I just feel like it works having her be British.
Yeah, well, I think part of that too is because the film is set in the 20s, that it also makes sense to then have this kind of back and forth of the Brits and the Americans, and you know, all the jokes they have at the Americans' expense in the movie. I think that helps it. And then, I mean, since we're Bond fans, I think I can safely say all three of us, we like to see some movies where they've got a lead role that's a British actor or actress, and see how they do it differently. And I mean, Rachel Weisz was just already known for doing some really interesting roles. She's very good at the serious stuff, but it was nice to see her get to be a little silly, and to really lean into a romance. But like you were saying earlier, Tristan, not too far into any one part of that, either comedy or romance or whatever. It's a good balance.
I fell in love with Rachel Weisz early on. I think it was 1996's Stealing Beauty with Liv Tyler, as well as I think in the same year, Chain Reaction came out with Morgan Freeman and Keanu Reeves. Have either of you seen Chain Reaction?
I have not.
No.
It is a very underrated and mostly unknown action film. It's very good. It's very good. I recommend everybody watch it. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's just great. It's just a really good 90s action film. And Rachel Weisz plays a physicist in it. And ever since I watched those movies, specifically Chain Reaction, I was just like, man, this woman is amazing. Like, she's beautiful in an understated way. She can do so much. She can do, like, her facial expressions are great. The things that she can do with her voice. It's just, I thought she was amazing. And then when this came out, it just solidified my love for this actress. And she is pitch perfect. And while they may have been considering a lot of different actresses, Rachel Weisz was the only actress that was offered the role. And I think they were very smart in doing that. And I think she's very smart in saying yes, because this, just like it did with Brendan Fraser, it elevated their careers. Like, once you get that Hollywood action film that's like that big budget special effects, more people know your name. And yeah, I think she's phenomenal. She's one of my favorites. I'll give anything that she's in a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with you both. I think, Christy, I liked the way you put it with this idea of like, there's just something about this being in the 20s and her being British that does really, really work, I think, that just makes this feel right. And so I absolutely am glad that they went in that direction. And I think the fact that she plays off of Brendan Fraser really well. And I think one of the things that's quite interesting about this is that I don't know if you would have expected her to kind of pull off the silliness, right? I think that's the thing. Like there is this amount of like silliness that this movie has, especially when you think of like that scene where she knocks everything over in the library. In the library. You know?
Which they did in one take.
Yeah, which makes sense.
They didn't have to do it again.
Because, you know, that's an insane stunt anyway. So, and the setup time for that would have been ridiculous because this is way before CGI. It was just, we'll just do it in post. You know, no, there's none of that. So this is all practical, but it's her playing of that I think really works.
One thing that I forgot to mention, and I apologize, was like you bringing up the library made me think of it. You know, like having a British person in Egypt totally makes sense, because of, if you think about all of the Egyptian antiquities that are in Britain right now. And I know, I mean, and the controversy, if you look at Greece and Africa and like all of the stuff that's been plundered and stolen and taken and on display in Britain, it totally makes sense that you would have British people who are experts in Egyptology. Right. And that adds that solidifies the story. It grounds it in some realism because you have the British person who's the intellectual who knows their stuff, and then you have the American Yank, you know, like gunslinger. And I think it just plays off really well on some harmless stereotypes. Yeah,
I like the way you put that, Tristan. There's a place in film like that where you can have it be, I think, a very harmless stereotype. Like you're not hurting anybody by kind of playing off those type of ideas at all. I'm not offended as an American that you're doing that. You know, like. No, you know, and it's in the 20s. You think of this; it's not that removed from the Wild West in the first place. Like we're not that far away from that, and so in the late 1800s. So I think it does really work, and you put those two together, and they, you know, I think that they really make the movie. And they make you feel good about the movie in many ways. Like, and they help you have a good time because you have these characters that I enjoy watching on screen. And I think that's the biggest thing that you want in a movie like this is you really do want characters that you're going to have a good time with, that you're going to enjoy spending time with. And so I think they do a great job in that.
And I just wanted to throw in really quick too, because I know that it's not a main character, but there were a lot of really good actors and actresses in there as support characters. I just specifically wanted to mention Oded Fair as one of the Magi, or the leader of them. I thought he was so memorable. The costuming for him and the other guys that were like protectors of the secrets were so cool. And you just want to be one of them.
Yeah.
You know, like at the face tattoos and everything. They were so cool.
His accent is amazing. His voice is so cool. He's just got this verve about him. He's just... I agree with everything you said. He's just so amazing. I love him in this movie. And whenever he pops up, like from 1999 onward, because he hasn't been in a lot of things, at least not a lot of famous things, but whenever he pops up, I'm like, ooh. And I'll point at the screen literally. And originally he was supposed to die at the end of the movie, but Stephen Sommers thought he was too awesome to kill off. Like he was too great to kill off, and thankfully he didn't, so we got to see him again. And I'm really happy that he's in Star Trek now too, so that's just cool.
Oh, that is cool. So is this 8 degrees of Star Trek? 7 degrees?
Everything is.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, just how many people have been in Star Trek in general. Like it's incredible.
Yeah.
The amount of people that you've gotten in that show. So it's really interesting. You know, Christy, obviously we just watched Jungle Cruise, which is legitimately a riff on this in many ways. Like the same feel that you get in this film. Like we're really riffing on this as an idea. And of course, you know, you have the brother character. And I wanted to ask you guys, you know, I think my wife turned to me as we were watching this and she goes, "This is how you do the brother character right." And especially in a movie like this. And so I wanted to ask you both about that and how you felt about his performance and, you know, his portrayal and everything here in the film.
I thought he was really charming. I thought he was funny. And whenever there's introduction of siblings, it's always so funny because it's the same speech every single time. Like, "Oh, you know me, baby sister." You know, like it's like, "Oh, well, you remember that time when our parents died 5 years ago?" Like, you know, it's always stuff like that. But I do really like John Hannah. I think he's great. I think he's a very versatile actor. Like he can do drama, he can do comedy, and he is very funny. I think there's a few times in the movie where I get a little eye rolly with him where I'm like, "Oh, okay, let's dial it back just a little bit. I feel like he's in a movie where everybody's the comic relief. He is the comic relief. And so sometimes you can go a little overboard, but like that's very rarely. Like his awesome moments far outweigh the times where I feel like they pushed it maybe a little too far.
Yeah, I'd say I'm on the same page. I mean, really, it was just one or two times that he was annoyingly so comedic. You know, definitely in the end, really, we're going to cringe over the two heroes kissing. This is not a Disney movie. But I think that his introduction in the movie is funny. And definitely the first time you see this movie, so unexpected, and they're going to hit you with the jump scare right away. It still got me. I've seen this movie a million times, and today my husband heard me scream. So that's a good scene. But yeah, he does such a great job. He usually does ride that line very well of being funny without going too far. And I think my favorite scenes with him were his introduction and him reading the Book of the Living, I think is what they called it. The Book of Amun-Ra. I
agree with both of you. Like, I think he is funny in the movie. I think for the most part, they do a good job of keeping him from not going overboard. Because it is a fine line. And I think one of the things that I found in this was that for the most part, I wasn't frustrated by him as a character existing, right? Like, I wasn't annoyed by him, which is a really good thing. Like, you don't want that in a film, to be annoyed by the character that you're watching on screen. And I thought he was really good. And so there are a couple times I think, like you both have pointed out, it's a little cringy, but that's okay. You know, like I wasn't really bothered by it in many ways, which is great. I thought, again, he's a great side character, and yeah, I could have done without the ridiculous, like, "Oh, are we gonna kiss now?" like kind of thing. Like that wasn't worth it. And you mentioned right at the beginning, but I think Arnold Vosloo is great as Imhotep. And I think what is nice, we talked about at the beginning, though, is them giving him that intro so that he is slightly more than just this one-note villain. And I think that really that brings it to life in a way that it would not have if they hadn't given him that. And so otherwise, I think he does a great job with being menacing and somebody who is doesn't really care about any of the consequences of his actions and until he, gets what he wants. I think that part is pretty great. So yeah, I enjoyed him a lot, actually. And that's important, I think, in this type of movie. So obviously this is an action movie. Like the main part of this film is it is full of action. And I wanted to ask y'all about the action in the film, and especially when we look at a movie from 1999, how does it hold up for you guys?
I think I think the action is great, and it's hard to divorce it from the CGI, where sometimes the CGI doesn't hold up. But it's from 1999. It's hard for these movies of the 90s, even 2000s, to have everything hold up. But I think overall it does. Now, once we get to The Mummy Returns, that's a different story. But with the first Mummy, I mean, sometimes the CGI mummies can look a little terrible. I don't want to say terrible, but like a little obvious. Mm-hmm. Like I'm thinking about that fight towards the end where it's clearly Brendan Fraser just pantomiming the sword fighting and the action, and they CGI the mummies in later. I mean, he does a great job of pantomiming it, but those mummies in particular look pretty computer generated. Mm-hmm. And again, this is not a criticism of the film because they did the best that they could in 1999. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying all this to sum up that even though some of the CGI doesn't hold up, the action that it contains is still amazing. It's still edge of your seat. It's still entertaining. The scarabs coming out of the bottom, coming out of the floor and spewing forth, vomiting on the beach, and just moving forward, and just the just like people getting melted by salt acid, and just like all the gunplay. Like, not only do we get mummies and zombie type things and killer insects, and we get amazing gunplay, but we also get amazing sword play too. Like that's just so, like, it's just all in one movie. That's just fantastic.
Well, and what are the curved swords called again? It's like a reaper or something. You know what I mean?
I'm not quite sure.
It's like a U shape.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. I don't know what their specific name is, unfortunately. But yeah, I know exactly what you're referring to.
Yeah. But yeah, I love that they even throw in the riding of horses and camels, and they actually had real rats in that scene with Rachel Weisz on the table and stuff like that. Apparently, they even had stunned locusts for that one scene where the Egyptologist is saying this is the end. They had to make the locusts calm down a little bit for that scene. I thought was funny. But yeah, the action was excellent. I think that it absolutely stands up. You get the feeling that the hero is not just a guy who's going to come in and do all of the action stuff, but also that he is capable of being like a gunslinger, being the swashbuckler, and doing so many different things that does very well. And I like that they gave the heroine also her own capability of, shooting a gun and having the fastest camel and stuff like that. I thought that was cool to not just make her the damsel in distress. So, but yeah, I thought the action was good. The main times that I noticed the bad CGI was the intro with the letters of the title looked very dated.
Yeah.
You're like, oh.
Yeah.
And the ghost of Anck-su-namun coming over in its, glittery glory to come back into the body.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, like that it's almost like a wave of, it's almost like a fluid type spirit that comes through. Yeah, like that kind of watery, fluidic feeling of CGI in the 1990s was very rough. Like that was super infancy. So yeah, you're absolutely right on that one.
Thanks. Yeah, I remember that.
One of the things about the action that I think that I really like that both of you are calling out is that we get lots of different type of action in this movie. And I think, with this type of film, that is important. You don't want to just be relying on one thing over and over again. And many times these days, I feel like with many action adventure movies or action movies, we're just kind of doing the same type of things over and over again. And especially when we talk about the idea as related to, CGI type of action, we just kind of feel like we're seeing it, what we've already seen a million times. And with this, I think one of the benefits of it is the fact that we hadn't been, doing this CGI thing forever yet. And so we didn't have that thing where we have seen it all before because, they're pushing the boundaries and seeing what they can get away with. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of classic things here, like, horse riding and, blowing up a boat, which is fun. And, like you said, Tristan, sword fighting and, all of this type of stuff, which I think is great. There are some fun, like, horror elements here, when the bug going inside of you and crawling around, that's terrifying to me, that kind of stuff. And so I think they do
the guy losing his eyes and his tongue.
Oh, that's awful.
I had to throw that in.
It's awful.
That was memorable for me.
And yeah, I mean, every time the bug goes inside his boot, I get completely wigged out. So, one, I don't like bugs at all. And two, that's just the thought of something crawling around inside of me like that is absolutely 100% terrifying. So, I think in the end, to me, the action still holds up. Now, I think we talked a little bit about the effects, and Christy, you rightly called out, I think, the worst effect in the movie is the font at the beginning and the name of the movie. It just looks hideous. I'm not really sure, even at that point, who did that and thought, oh, this looks great. Like, you can barely read that it says The Mummy before it kind of terribly dissolves. I think one of the things, though, about, especially like The Mummy CGI and those kind of things is that it feels as archaic now as like when Jason and Argonauts looked like 40 years ago to people then. And so I don't know, there's something about it to where it just doesn't bother me. Like, this is what they could do then, and it's not about whether it holds up now, it's whether or not it serves the story. And I think for the most part here, they don't use it to just use it. Like, hey, look what we can do. It's like everything that they're doing does feel like it serves the story. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you heard me talk about how the CGI does look dated in some parts more than others, but they did what they could in 1999, and it services the story, and none of it's gratuitous, and none of it is needless, and none of it is distractingly bad. You have to respect every movie within its time. Like, not every movie is going to be like Terminator 2, where the special effects still hold up today. And not every movie's going to be like Jason and the Argonauts, like you talked about, where you have that stop motion skeletons where it's like at 10 frames per second. It absolutely serves a story, and it's still good enough 20 years later to enjoy it and not think, oh my God, this is crazy bad.
Yeah, I would say, the only part that really was cringeworthy for me was the title. Otherwise, it was things here and there, but overall, you definitely put it in rotation as something that was the best for what it could be. I really wanted to give them credit for everything that it took to put together the Mummy himself, effects-wise. And so that's why I did want to bring that up really quick. It's just the fact that Arnold Vosloo decided to be the stand-in for all the motion capture when he could have had a stunt person do that. And they worked on 4 different stages of the effects for the mummy to go from being stage 1 of completely decayed to stage 2 of like mostly regenerated with some skin bits showing through, and then stages 3 and 4 where he's almost completely human looking again, but still has 1 or 2 patches like his cheek was missing. That stuff was cool, and that stuff to me still holds up.
Yeah. No, I think you're really right, Christy. I was reading that too, and I was really impressed the fact that he was dedicated enough to the character to want to be the person to do that. And I think what was really interesting is that reminded me a little bit of the way that Andy Serkis felt about, playing Gollum, and the fact that, he really, he wanted to be the person that was on screen, with it, the characters were acting against, the people were acting against. And I have a lot of respect for actors who are willing to do that, to help out their other actors in their craft. I think that that's just really cool, that, that they would care about that in that way. And, I think it's always a little interesting to me. You can tell people that, are just in it for the paycheck and they're gone. And I think, he clearly had a thought process about this character in a way that he wanted to see this character portrayed on screen. And he was very clear about that with the director, and he was very clear about that when he was doing the performance, and even just, making sure that the performance was as much him as possible, even if it was going to be a lot of, ridiculous CGI at that point. I'm sure a lot of actors were like, this is ridiculous, but he was in for it, and I think that's really cool. So one thing I do want to ask both of you, Christy, you know how much I love movie music, and one of the things and I will say, I think that a good action adventure movie is either made or broken by the music that's in there to accompany the character. The themes that you create, that they either really bring something to life, or they just kind of are there. And I wanted to know, Jerry Goldsmith did this score, and, he's done so many things in the past, whether, for Star Trek or Rudy. I mean, the list is endless for the things that Jerry Goldsmith has done. What did you guys think of this score?
It is my firm opinion that this movie would not have been as successful as it was without this music. And I don't say that a lot. And I don't say that often. I truly believe that this music, this score, elevates the movie to a next level. And you still have a great action film, you still have great performances, but this movie packs a better punch with Jerry Goldsmith's tracks. It evokes the 20s, it evokes the era, it evokes the location, it evokes the genre, and it is a perfect encapsulation of what this movie is supposed to be. And I listened to this a lot when I was a kid. I listened to this on its own. Like, I had the score, I had the CD, and I would listen to it while I read my Dune novels. Because it just felt appropriate. I was just like, as I'm reading about the desert, I'm going to listen to a score that takes place in the desert, and it just fits. And I can't say anything more than that. I'd really, truly feel like this is the guy who gave us the Universal Pictures fanfare and so many great Star Trek themes, from Next Generation and Voyager and original films, and, just Total Recall and Chinatown and Planet of the Apes. And he just brings it from decade to decade. And this is by far one of my favorite Goldsmith's tracks. This guy defined the 90s, in my opinion, when it comes to scores. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but I really like this movie.
That's strange.
No, really?
I couldn't have picked that up from anything that you said so far. So that's a wow. Right here, folks. Revelation from Tristen Riddell.
I do want to add, though, yeah, I'm with you, Tristan. I think that, well, obviously, I'm never as big of a score person as Matt is, or most other people, I think. But this was one that stood out to me, definitely. And I was thinking about how it reminded me of another score and realized what it was the score that James Horner did for Mask of Zorro from '95. Not to say that it was derivative or anything like that, just saying that it followed the same kind of heroic and romantic themes. It really had strong themes specifically for certain characters, or like with the Romeo and Juliet feel, like you were saying, Matt, of Anaxunamun and Imhotep. I think that it just really played well with the scene's feeling, and with having big themes for people that were a recurring theme.
This is really interesting because I'm at the complete opposite of both of you. I don't think this is a great score. I think this is actually a pretty lazy score from Goldsmith. I think one is that it plays a little bit too much into trying to sound obviously Middle Eastern. And then much of loving Jerry Goldsmith as I do, the action music sounds like it comes straight from just any of the soundtracks that I've heard for Star Trek. It's not original for himself, and it doesn't have the sweeping grand theme that I would love to hear, especially for the hero in this movie, or not just heroes, but not just the hero, but the heroes in this film, because I like to think that, Rick is not the only hero in this movie, and honestly, it's really him and Evelyn together that make up the heroship, obviously. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just in a different place than both of you in this, and it's quite all right. I don't mind being in the minority. I'm in the minority about many things when it comes to film. But I was honestly disappointed in this soundtrack because I have come to expect so much from Goldsmith. I love him. I love his Star Trek work, and I love so many of the other scores he's done. But this one is a misfire for me, and part of that is because I wanted there to be something that sounded, I guess, more on the lines of an Indiana Jones type of soundtrack where you really have a grand theme for the character and at the same time play with sounds of where you are. And this one just, I didn't feel like was successful enough for me. So, yeah, I know that
I've been with you for thick and thin with Batman v Superman. And this is how you repay me, that you come after me like this.
I know it's, I hate doing it and I hate saying it because, like, I legitimately, I have so many Goldsmith scores. And he is so good at creating thematic elements. I mean, and again, I think I always kind of go back to, like, Rudy, because Star Trek's easy to go to, but, like, that's just such a beautiful theme, and it fits that character so well. And I missed that kind of work here. And then, yeah, it was really the action music that sounded like so much of his Star Trek work, especially Star Trek V work. So, yeah, I mean, it just, didn't work as well for me. So, well, I'm going to be interested because, I feel like Tristan has been on the fence about the film the whole time. And so I'm really wondering, as we look towards our ratings, Tristan, what would you rate The Mummy?
I checked, actually, you probably saw me go on my phone real quick while we were recording, and I was trying to check my Letterboxd review because I couldn't remember what I rated it. I was like, did I give this a 4.5 or did I give this a 5? And I gave it a 4.5. And honestly, I feel like I try to only give 5 stars to what I deem like perfect movies, like something I couldn't see change, or it needed anything that needed to be changed. And like with a few things that I said before, where like with some things going over the top with Jonathan, but that doesn't really ruin anything for me. I know I'm splitting hairs here, but I'm on the fence between 4.5 and 5. I love this movie. It's one of my favorites. I think it's great. I could watch this at any time. It's so much fun. It's great action, great story, great acting, great characters. And yeah, I'll probably stick with my 4.5 because I'm going to save the 5 stars for like The Godfather.
Okay. I can see that. Yeah, I'm with you, Tristan. I'm the same as far as rating movies. I really prefer to keep 5s for something that I just don't have any ticks off for at all. And this one, I have a couple of things that I think could have been done better. And I meant to say earlier, one that also stood out to me was in the writing with just the scenes where the mummy is composing his body. Finally, it feels like there's a lot of scenes in there where he's just walking with command. And it doesn't really make sense why he just needs to be seen in different parts of Cairo walking with presence. I think they could have just made that go a little quicker, I guess. But aside from that and the couple other things we mentioned, I think it's pretty great. And I've, like I said, watched it a million times. So I give it a 4.5 out of 5. And I did figure out what those curved swords are called. It's scimitars.
Nice.
Or a sickle.
Okay. Fantastic.
Yeah. Curved Egyptian sword. So yeah, I give it 4.5 out of 5 of those.
It's been really interesting because obviously just talking through the movie is always fun with people and, seeing where they are. And it's also a movie that I have not seen in a very long time. And so, I bought the set that has them in 4K and it looks great. And I think it's always fun to be able to go back to a film and see what it really looks like in a nice picture presentation with HDR. And, this looks great. So I highly recommend the look. And if you can find this in 4K, and for all that we talked about, to me, this is still, I think I would give this 3.5 out of 5. I really enjoyed the movie, but it's not one that I think moves into a conversation where I could be saying that this is like one of my favorite movies or anything. But what it did make me excited for was continuing with the series, and I, in all honesty, I cannot remember how I felt about the other films. And so we're going to be talking about the second part here in a few weeks. And I can't remember at all, really, The Mummy Returns, which is kind of great. I kind of enjoy being able to go into these, not remembering what it's like. And so we'll definitely see what it is like when we get there. Tristan made a comment that made me think maybe it's not as good or it doesn't hold up.
No, it was just it's famously bad with CGI showing The Rock as the Scorpion King.
Oh, yes,
that's all I was alluding to.
I do remember the Scorpion King now that you mention that. Absolutely. So It's now the time of the show where we do give some recommendations for people and what they'd like to recommend to everybody here as listeners of the 602 Club. And so, Tristan, since you're our guest, was there anything that you would like to recommend to people that you've been checking out or watching or reading recently?
Well, I haven't watched this recently, but I've been trying to tell people about it. And if you haven't seen it yet, it's very much worth your time. There's 2 seasons on Apple TV Plus of For All Mankind. It's a really good show. It's really well done. It's about an alternate history of what if the Soviet Union landed on the moon first? What would the space race look like if it never ended? And it's a very good show. And they're I think they're finishing the season 3 right now, and they've already been greenlit for a season 4. If you're a T-Mobile user, you can get, I think, a year of Apple TV Plus for free, so check that out. It's also only $5 a month, and both 2 seasons are out, so it's very much worth those $5.
And Ted Lasso's on there, so get it.
And get it. There's some really good stuff on Apple TV Plus right now. But yeah, I'm very much have been trying to tell my friends and family about For All Mankind. It is very much worth your time.
Nice. I'm gonna have to check that out. I will say I was originally trying to decide what I was going to recommend because I've been into some different things lately, and I feel like I've been talking about a lot of documentaries. But I have something a little different this time that I almost forgot to mention. I got back into reading comics again recently. I kind of stopped for a while because I just was into some other stuff. But and I wanted to recommend 12 Gauge Comics, which is more of an independent group. They actually started because they saw a gap in comics for crime and action adventure books. So they do a lot of that kind of stuff. And they've also been partnering with some awesome creators that I already liked, like Doug Wagner and artist Bryan Stelfreeze, who is a master of color theory, if you've never seen his work. So I'm currently reading a book that my friends Hoyt and his wife Lisa worked on called Yumi Spy Fatale Baddie Royale, that 12 Gauge Comics put out. So I recommend checking out 12 Gauge Comics and the Yumi book.
Nice. That's awesome. I have not been reading very many comics recently, so that is really cool to know something that might be worth checking out. Well, I would like to recommend to everybody, my wife and I just started going back through a show from the 90s, and it is called Mad About You. Paul Reiser, Helen Hunt, and goodness, I forgot how funny this show is. I also forgot how really true to life it is with married couples, especially younger married couples, and the things that you talk about and or argue about or any of those type of things. I think they do a fantastic job with really kind of getting into that, and I love it. I mean, I'm just really enjoying it, and it's fun to be able to go back to a show like that and really dig into it. And of course, you can find it on Amazon Prime for free, which is great. And also there was a revival, I think, of it for one season there on Amazon Prime as well. So definitely would say that is worth your time to check out Mad About You, especially if you've never seen it before. There are a lot of, those older sitcoms that, you just may have missed when they were on, or you maybe seen bits and pieces of. And it's really fun to see, like, those older shows like that, how, we talk about serialization and all that kind of stuff these days with shows, but they weren't above making sure that they were connecting their episodes and their characters were going back in the day either, and especially for the better shows. So it's definitely worth checking out, and I hope you will. Tristan, fantastic, man, to have you back on. And I'm really excited, honestly, that we are going to be going back and talking about The Mummy Returns as well. And so can't wait to have you back. But tell everybody, of course, we mentioned the podcast that you do beforehand, but again, remind everybody where they can find you online and what they should be checking out.
Yes, you should be checking out thenerdparty.com. I helped create this network with someone you might have known, Matt Rushing. And we created the network together. And there's a lot of great content on there at thenerdparty.com. There's Star Trek shows, Star Wars shows. There is Babylon 5, Doctor Who, film, television, something for everyone. And new content coming at you every single day of the week. I have 2 shows on there, Second Contact, a Lower Decks podcast, commentary podcast, which we talked about. And I also host a show called House Lights, where we take a director, one of our favorite directors, and we go through every single film of their filmography. Sometimes we bend the rules. Like right now we're on Spielberg, and we didn't want to, cut out the next 2 years of our lives to talk about Spielberg because he has so many films. And so we're doing one from each decade, and then we're moving on to somebody else. So please check it out. And you can find me on Twitter at the Insane Ramen, same username, and on Letterboxd.
Nice. Yeah, I keep saying I need to check out House Lights because John Mills has told me about it. So now that you're doing Spielberg too, I'm like, I have to.
And we're doing the Spielberg movies that not everybody talks about. Like our first one was Sugarland Express, and we just recorded Always with Richard Dreyfuss, Holly Hunter, and John Goodman. No one really talks about those films. We're not doing his worst films. We're just doing the ones that no one really talks about. Like, how many more things are there to say about Jurassic Park and Jaws?
Yeah.
So that's why we're doing that.
Oh, cool. So for me, of course, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BestBenBell. And when I'm not here with Matt, I also do a show called Sabers and Spells with my friends Amanda and Teresa, where we talk about more of the niche geeky movies and shows that we don't usually get to talk about. So I know we've been on a bit of a hiatus, like I said, for Amanda's wedding, which was a geek wedding. So I'll be sharing more of that stuff. But we'll be back soon when they get back from their honeymoon.
And also, you could find me here on the network with a few different shows. Of course, got Snyder Cuts here in the same feed. John Mills and I are about to start recording our next show that we're going to be doing, which is going to be a lot of fun, assembling Avengers. So that'll be coming there in October. So look for that. You can also find me doing Literary Treks in the Orb. Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and the Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And I got some new episodes of the Orb coming out soon, as well as we have a very special thing coming up, and hint, hint, it might have to do with it being a long road getting from there to here. So take a look for that there on the network. You can also find me on social media all over the place, MattRushing02. And on the Nerd Party Network, I finished Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, where we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And last but not least, you can find me with the one and only John Mills talking about Star Wars on Aggressive Negotiations. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?